Welcome to the Cascadia Workers Project, the home of the Cascadian working class progressive. I'm your host, David Bushnell, and this is Dain Drumhiller, and we, for the first time, are using an actual video setup in the Cascadia Workers Project studio under the shadow of Mount Tahoma. Today, we have a very special 9/11 episode for you. In addition to your typical Cascadia update, we will be doing a deep dive into Afghanistan, apropos of it being, in fact, 9/11, as we are doing this recording. But before we get into any of our Cascadia update or our national stories, Dain, did you give my name to the Marine Corps?
No.
Because I definitely got hit up by a recruiter offering me about 20 grand less a year than I'm making.
Really? That's so funny.
I was just like, I emailed him back being like, how did you get my, like, how does I end up on the Marine Corps recruiter list?
Well, they want to kill you already. What this tells me is you're already on a list of people who need to die in order for the government to continue to exploit the people.
Fantastic.
But this entire can't just kill you.
This entire project could be subtitled "Suicide by Government."
Yeah, truly.
Like that is our entire goal here. If they end up killing us, then you know we were speaking the truth.
Yeah, right. It sucks that that's really the only way to know.
I mean, yeah. My hope and prayer is they do me like Malcolm. It's like when what was it, like Peter gets crucified. He's like, don't crucify me right side up, crucify me upside down, because I don't want to go out the same way as So we've been gone for 3 weeks. Any highlights? Anything new in your life?
Well, I went to Maui when you went to Texas, or like right before you went to Texas, and that's why, obviously, if you listen to the update, that's why we're taking the break, is because I went on vacation, David went away for work, and also we wanted to get this studio set up. So we came back after those initial 2 weeks and tried to record an episode, and then we were just like, this is not going to work. Or like in the midst of you being in Texas, we tried to record an episode via like video conference and just realized that it wasn't going to work, and it's not what we... it's not a product that we were comfortable putting out just because it wasn't up to par. And after listening to my audio quality in the update, I'm very glad we didn't do a full episode that. Yeah, I wasn't, and that has nothing, because... No, I mean, it's video conference.
It's a video conference, and like my mic was, like, it just, like, I sounded like I was super far away from my mic, and I wasn't. I was using my nice mic, but I was ultimately on a laptop, and so I probably had some quality drop with that.
That's why when you initially set up with your phone, I was like, we need to figure out something, because as bad as it was on your laptop, on the phone it was so much worse.
Yeah, then the laptop was borderline untenable. I was like, hey,
sounded like you were on a old school crank phone where you pulled it up and you're like, operator, connect me to Dain Drumhiller in the Pacific Northwest, please.
God damn, yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's yeah,
man, we took the time off. Obviously we used the time well, but we're very happy to be back. We're very happy to be giving everyone like a product that we think is going to be much higher standard, which is what we aim for, is to give everyone a much higher standard product. We're here today to talk about the news, to tell you about our YouTube and our Patreon, and launch us into phase 2 of the CWP.
Exactly, and hopefully we'll be getting some more viewers. Definitely share this with your friends, like and subscribe, all that good stuff.
Smash that like button, hit the bell.
You know, all the bells and whistles and thumbs and all that good stuff. Just interact if you enjoy us, and if you hate us, also interact.
Interact if you hate us, please. I love a good internet argument.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't get involved, but Dain. That's what Dain
certainly will.
That's what Dain lives for. Yeah. Anyway, let's hop into episode 20, Back for Bounties.
Ted Cruz, go fuck yourself.
Are you a cop?
Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath?
9, 11.
Oh my God, it's Bernie Sanders with the folding chair!
Yes, I'm an evil left-wing sheeple snowflake working for the deep state, here to force your wives to get abortions and then leave you for transgender lesbians. Yes, it was us Antifa that stormed the Capitol to make you all look bad so that we can take your guns, spread communism, and blast Cardi B in your churches. And you're never gonna stop us, no, 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 you're never gonna stop us.
Alrighty, and we are going to start our first story out with a little bit different of a beginning, looking at, instead of just BC, the entire country of Canada, particularly looking at the Canadian federal elections, which has implications across the whole country of Canada, including BC. Now, Canada is in the throes of a prime minister election, and even though their last election was in 2019, Canada operates off of a parliamentary system, which is dramatically different from the United States bicameral legislature. And we've talked about that a little bit. But as a little bit of a refresher for you and for the audience, the Parliament will elect members of Parliament that are unaffiliated from parties. They don't have to be a part of a specific, Republican or Democrat two-party system. Now, those individual smaller parties, like you will have in Canada, you have a New Democratic Party, which is pretty much localized to BC, and some other key liberal and conservative parties. So these different organizations will form a coalition that ends up looking more and more like a two-party system that we're used to. So you have a liberal and a conservative coalition, but keep in mind that these are coalitions of smaller groups. So when we're talking about the liberal coalition, we're not talking about a liberal party. We're talking about a coalition of parties that form the liberal coalition. Same with the conservatives. They do the exact same thing. Now, because of this, and you can have a minority party, that means you have less members, but still have the prime minister in that. And that's exactly what happened in 2019 with Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, for his first many years as prime minister, was ruling from the majority coalition, but now the Liberal coalition is in the minority. So after COVID happens, what Justin ends up trying to do is make it so that he is able to rule from the majority coalition, thinking that the Liberals are going to get a lot of support from the country and from the public. He ended up calling this election because in Canada, in the parliamentary system, the prime minister is able to call an election and say, we're going to have an election. You guys are going to decide whether you want to keep me and keep the government formed in its current form, or you can dramatically change it. And this gamble made sense. When you looked at the opinion polls, Trudeau was doing really well. And so it makes political sense that he might do this on the back end of COVID, trying to leverage his relative success when compared to the U.S. At managing COVID. Now, when Canadians were asked to seriously consider an alternative to Trudeau, his opinion poll lead immediately evaporated, and they are now in a very tight neck-and-neck race between Trudeau, representing the Liberal coalition, and Erin O'Toole, representing the Conservative coalition. Yes, the Conservative coalition leader's last name is literally O'Toole.
Fitting.
I mean... And as we go through this, I'm going to point out that their conservative is what we would consider a political moderate or a moderate in the United States, at least rhetorically. I'm not sure about the actual policies that are implemented on a national level, but for example, when they're talking about when the conservatives in Canada were talking about loosening some of the liberal gun restrictions, there was huge backlash, and O'Toole had to walk that statement back. So there is definitely a different appetite for conservatism in Canada, but it still can be very, very dangerous, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. So as I mentioned before, the general makeup of Parliament is coalitions of neoliberals, or the Liberal Party, with some of our socialist buddies in the NDP, with Jagmeet Singh led by Jagmeet Singh and all that, and then the Conservatives. So let's talk about this challenger, Erin O'Toole, right? So his policies, even with that caveat that they aren't as conservative, his policies still aren't that great. He's still super anti-vaccine. Being anti-vaccine, though, here doesn't mean that he's not going to mandate a vaccine. It's mandating a vaccine similar to what we see here in Washington, which is you either have to have a vaccine or get regularly tested. That's what he's talking about. And then over the pandemic, the government spent over $1 trillion. The Liberal government spent over $1 trillion, and O'Toole has promised to balance the books without making cuts. Without making cuts to social services. So, not sure how he's going to manage to do that when Canada doesn't have an inflated military budget. But we'll see if he's elected whether he can actually deliver on that. The Conservatives also promised a tax credit. The Liberals have promised to create a $10 a day national childcare program, meaning it will cost $10 per day to have childcare for across the board. You can obviously. Excuse me, got some burps, got some gas. It's a pretty cool deal. The Conservatives, conversely, have promised a tax credit of $6,000 to help pay for daycare. We don't know where that tax credit is coming from, but that seems to fly in the face of the idea of balancing the books without, making cuts. Especially when this $10 a day program is already kind of baked into the cake. The deals have been made. It's already been done. So O'Toole would be rolling back the program that is, basically on its way to being implemented for a $6,000, I'm assuming, per person tax cut or something like that. So ultimately, even with these stark differences, you can the race is neck and neck between Trudeau and O'Toole, and I have a difficulty finding real differences between them from a leftist standpoint, because you have a neoliberal and a slightly more outwardly conservative neoliberal.
Yeah.
So
that's really what it comes down to, right? It's just two neolibs fighting for the throne.
Exactly. So if you're in Canada, particularly in BC, and you're listening to this show, know that going into it. If y'all had Jagme up there or somebody, that'd be really tight. But obviously, there's going to be difficulties.
Jagme.
There's going to be difficulties across the board being able to do that. So, Dain, this feels like a great example of how neoliberals are just so out of touch with reality. Do you think that Trudeau's rationale for initiating this election was justified?
I think his idea made sense. But I think it shows how disconnected he is from his people, that, it can instantly be this close. Like on paper, the idea of COVID, great success, and then make election, gain majority. It checks out, Mm-hmm. Clearly, it's not working out that way. Clearly, there's a discrepancy, if you will. In the opinions of the Canadian people.
One of the things that, like it or not, Donald Trump was a radicalizing factor in the United States, a radicalized mm-hmm. people left and also radicalized people right. And that was because we came off of, almost 10 years of staunch neoliberal politics, through Obama. And, we had the highest grossing year of defense spending under Obama, not under Trump or Bush, was under Obama. And we're going to top that out under Biden.
Oh, yeah. Democrats love war.
Oh, yeah.
Democrats love military and they love war. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah, they are just better at hiding it than mm-hmm, Republicans.
Yeah.
Because, Republicans are diving into,
They take the war hawk and paint it as a dove. And they take the missiles and paint them as an olive branch.
I was going to say that's a brilliant. But I was going to say they take the war hawk and paint it as a eagle.
Yeah, they do. But
quite literal
in the separation of hawks and doves.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah.
War.
Yeah. I think that you're right. It does show how out of touch he is with his populace and the people that he's ruling. Why do you think that why do you think that the race is so tight? Because comparatively, they did do a good job with COVID.
That's a tough question, being an American.
Yeah. I don't want to.
I think the race is tight because they're both neolibs. I think in America we have a much wider chasm between the beliefs of each party than they do necessarily in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot easier for somebody to be like, it's kind of like it was back in like the 90s, where it was just like you had politicians and you were like, okay, well, because like back in the 90s, a Democratic voter could see a Republican candidate and be like, you know what, some of the shit that he's saying is okay, but overall I disagree with him.
Well, I think there's an argument. I think there's an argument that still exists to this day.
I do think it exists. I think it's the political system in America is much more polarized now, though.
Sure.
And based on more of a social status and aspect than anything else.
Oh.
Because there are definitely Republicans who support policies that I agree with. For sure. I've said that in the past too. It's like, if a candidate were to come up who claims he's a Republican but is willing to do the things that I need him to do for the people of America, I'd vote for him. I don't care.
Sure, but you're never going to see a Republican calling for increased taxes.
Because in America, politicians play to party and the payment. So they don't play to voters because they can just adjust the way the votes are counted. They can gerrymander their way into it not mattering. So what matters to them is how the party feels about them and how the money that's coming in feels about them. So that's what they're adjusting their policies to.
Absolutely. Well, circling back to my earlier point about how Donald Trump was a radicalizing factor in the United States, do you think that if Trudeau were to lose here, that could really galvanize at least the Liberal coalition to do some soul searching about, okay, what did we do to kind of lose this lead?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it would be really good for Canada, because I think ultimately Canada is a very progressive place. Like, the people of Canada. Yeah, I mean, yes, there are conservatives everywhere, and yes, people have conservative beliefs, but overall I think Canada is an overwhelmingly progressive space, and I think that's shown by the amount of control that progressives have had in Canada for such a long time. But I think the reason it would be good for them is because it will, like you said, kind of cause them to do a recount and reevaluation of their own values within the coalition, and hopefully understand that the people would rather than a corpo douche like Trudeau, they would rather have somebody who's actually going to do something rather than just rather than just wear a blue tie. See, you have a lot of blue tie wearers who are red tie voters or red tie policy people. But they're wearing that blue tie, so it doesn't really matter. But they're paying into corporate interest. Whereas I think if they lost here, it would definitely cause them to reevaluate and realize that they can't just put somebody with a blue tie up there and win.
They need to actually have good, solid blue policies.
Yeah, exactly. Because politics, like I said, Canada is progressive. It's a progressive place. Like, the voters are primarily progressive, and I think that when the Liberal coalition loses votes, it's not because the people of Canada prefer more conservative ideals. It's because they're tired of being
fed empty promises.
Yeah, fed empty promises and getting hung out to dry by the people who claim to be the more progressive side of things.
Sure.
So while they still have a safe, pretty moderate and still willing to do fairly progressive things like childcare tax credits and things like that, it's way less danger than voting in a Republican in the U.S.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that, and with that in mind, let's talk about the NDP in particular then. So with the race being so tight, do you think there's an argument for the NDP with its kind of more progressive leftist coalition to kind of take on some force the vote type measures to be like, hey, these are some of the big issues that we're really concerned about, and we're not going to be part of a governing coalition because the government the prime minister needs to form a governing coalition, right? we're not going to be part of a governing coalition unless you put out these certain policies.
So, again, knowing as little as I do about the way that Canadian government works, but knowing enough to kind of understand power and how it's regulated, I think now, if any time, would be a good time to make that stand. It's kind of like how we were talking about not that long ago about how the squad in the U.S. needs to kind of put their foot down, and the true progressives in the U.S. and the true leftists in the U.S. in the group of U.S. lawmakers need to start putting their foot down and just being like, we're not going to be a party to the bullshit. And I think the NDP?
Yeah, NDP, New Democratic Party.
Yeah, I almost said NDC. I think the NDP, if they had a good time to do it, it would be now.
Yeah, that's kind of what prompted this question.
You get our support if you play ball.
Yeah,
like we'll get in, we'll do the governing coalition, but only if you play ball. If you're going to continue to put up, corpo servers, then we're not going to play ball. This is not going to how it's going to go.
Look, we'll get in bed with you, but you have to go down.
Yeah, exactly. No head, no deal.
I think that's a good place to leave that story.
Yeah.
So we'll keep an eye on that. Give you a quick update when the election gets called. Voting begins this week, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll definitely be giving a quick update on that. But at this point, let's focus in on BC because that is actually in Cascadia and within our purview.
Hell yeah.
So let's focus up on BC a little bit and talk about the vaccine card requirement that's going into effect on September 13th. That's coming up this week, actually in a couple days. Yeah, literally 2 days from now. So the vaccine card will either be a physical card or a digital card, user's choice, which will be necessary for BC residents to access non-essential businesses and services. BC health officials announced a new portal so that citizens are able to quickly and easily access their vaccine cards, and BC Premier John Horgan said, quote, "We have made the BC vaccine card easy for people to get and easy for businesses to check at a glance. The card is a significant step in getting our economy running on all cylinders and returning to social events safely with the confidence that those around us are also fully vaccinated." End quote. Once enacted, one dose at minimum will be necessary by September 13th through October 24th, after which both doses of your drug of choice will be necessary.
Can it be ketamine?
I'll
get the vaccine too, but can we put ketamine on my thing just so people know I'm wavy?
This is a total aside, and I'm sorry for this, but I keep getting these ads for this like psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and I'm just like, but maybe, like,
dude, yeah.
I was just like, but maybe, and they're not.
Grants are being given, and progress is being made,
and they're not a ketamine clinic either.
No,
they're
yeah,
like they have ketamine, like they have, for those of you.
And I fully believe in ketamine clinics too,
sure,
as well.
I fully,
to an extent. I mean, it's a whole other converson, but I think they're very helpful.
Yeah, but I keep getting these ads for it, and I'm like, well, maybe. Once enacted, as we said, you're going to have to get your first dose by the 13th. You're going to have to get your second dose by October 24th, after which after you get both doses, or by October 24th you need both doses. The vaccine card will grant you access to the following: restaurants, pubs, bars for indoor and outdoor seating, organized indoor events with 50 or more people, indoor sports and recreation facilities, indoor concerts and shows, gyms, clubs and movies, and indoor sporting events. All pretty standard stuff. We have, very similar requirements here in the U.S. The vaccine card will be enforced by a fine system which directly targets individuals and event organizers with a range of fines up to $2,300. Dain, this is kind of a unique enforcement mechanism because it's not going after just the owners or just the participants, but it's going after everybody. So participants could face small dollar fines up to a couple $100, but like say the event coordinator could get hit with that $2,300 fine. The owner could get hit with that $2,300 fine. You could have multiple people along the chain of command that are running it getting hit by that fine and being hit personally, not the business, but them personally. Do you think this is going to be an effective enforcement mechanism?
I mean, I definitely think targeting people's wallets is an effective way of enforcing things like this, especially something so menial. It's like when it comes to like it all comes down to how well they enforce it. And that'll be defined within the first like 2-3 months of this being in effect, because it's like speeding on back roads, right? It's like, I know there's no cops back here, so I'm gonna go as fast as I want, because I know, even though there is a law that states I will be fined if I'm exceeding a certain speed, nobody's going to catch me doing it. If they're very proactive about the way they enforce this and show the people that, yes, we are about this, yes, we're about safe interaction, and we're not taking no for an answer on this, and they kind of buckle down on it in the first 3 months, I think it'll be really effective.
I think that it has the potential to be effective. I'm a little bit worried about the fines topping out at $2,300.
Yeah, it is a little low, huh?
I agree. Yeah, I think that it's
I think $5,000 is a great number.
I think $5,000 would probably be really solid, because even a reasonably wealthy owner is still going to be able to eat that no problem. But a lot of the medium businesses that are going to be the ones that are really flippant about this, like bars and stuff like that.
Bars are immediately what I thought about when I saw this. I was just like, oh, I know several bars that would just be like, fuck it, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. And so that'd be kind of my concern. But like a $5,000 hit to a bar owner is, unless they're a big conglomerate, is going to actually be meaningful.
Yeah.
But then again, a $5,000 hit to an Amazon warehouse is going to be significantly less meaningful. So I think that
it would be less meaningful to the administrators, but if there's workers that are not following these rules and they're the ones getting hit by this,
but then again, at that point, they wouldn't be getting hit by the full force of that.
Definitely, it's up to $2,300. I will say, though, overall, as far as vaccine enforcement, I am hopeful, and I do feel positive of it overall, just based on the few interactions I've had as we've moved into like this. We're allowed to go out and do stuff, but we have to have vaccine cards and stuff like that. Last weekend I went to a show downtown at Numos, and it was really well run. It was very well taken care of. Like, everyone had their vaccine cards. We still all wore masks in the venue. It was and I felt comfortable, which I didn't expect to feel. I felt comfortable in the audience at this show. That's
good. But then again, Numos is in the heart of downtown Seattle.
Well, yeah, it's in the heart of Cap Hill.
Yeah, as opposed to a small theater, a small venue.
But it was a busy weekend. Like Pride was happening during this time.
Yeah.
And PAX was happening at this time.
Oh, yeah, PAX was this week, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a busy weekend. It would have been very easy for enforcement to lapse. You know what I mean? So, and I don't... The enforcement that I want to see in BC on this particular policy is a lot heavier than the enforcement that I see currently in our area, because I don't really see much enforcement happening other than by the businesses, which are the ones who are expected to enforce it at this point.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what we see as the efficacy of this law and of these kind of mandates. So do you think that mandating that people basically to go out into the world function in the world, mandating that they have a vaccine, do you think that is going to be an effective way at encouraging some of the vaccine hesitant people that might not have a vaccine yet?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because there's a difference between hesitant people and anti-vaxxers.
Yes.
I don't think there's a whole lot you can say to anti-vaxxers other than you have to get it or you will be fined regardless of what you're doing, that's going to get them to get it. Fined or jailed. I don't think there's a lot of ways to sway them. But the people we're talking about here are the vaccine hesitant. The people who are the Joe Rogans of the world. I'm healthy. Let's just play it out with respect to these people, because ultimately we want these people to get these vaccines.
Yes, with respect to the people. No, with respect to Joe Rogan.
Yeah, of course. But the Joe Roganites of the world, the followers of Rogan, if you will.
The children of Rogan.
Yeah, the children of Rogan. The people who are like, I'm young, I'm in good health, I take extra medical vitamins that have been proven to help increase my immune system and boost my ability to fight off diseases.
I get that by licking dirt, but okay.
Yeah, I know. We got that from licking rusty spoons and shit as a child, but this class of people are the vaccine hesitant.
Sure. Sure.
Or I don't go out a lot.
I haven't heard that one, but
I have, and it's very interesting. It's like my dad was one of those people. He's like, I don't go out a lot, so it's like not a huge deal. I'm gonna wait. But he actually got it pretty damn early because of his age.
Sure.
And I was super proud of him for that. Dad, I'm so proud of you for getting the vaccine. You guys are awesome. Congratulations. I'm pretty sure it was because of his work. But like I said, these are the people who are looking to sway, and ultimately it's going to be a case of FOMO. Okay? Mm-hmm. Fear of missing out. The football season is coming around. In Seattle, you can't go to any major sporting event without having full vaccination record. It's going to be the same in Canada. Granted,
yeah, hockey season's coming, huh?
The BC Lions are not as big of a deal as the Seahawks are. But hockey season's coming around, the Nucks, people are going to want to go see the Nucks play.
I want to go see the Nucks play. I want to go back to Canada.
I hate the Nucks, but we're playing them in October. So yeah, I think the FOMO is what's going to encourage a lot of these vaccine hesitants to get the vaccine. That, combined with seeing a lot of the people around them that have gotten the vaccine being fine, because I know a lot of people are fearful because of misinformation about the effects of the vaccine, but I don't know a single person who has had adverse effects of the vaccine.
But you know what I do know? People that have died from COVID.
Oh yeah, plenty.
Yeah.
I know a lot. And so I think all of these elements are going to kind of come together, and the vaccine hesitants that we know are going to be like, fuck it, fine, I want to go see the Canucks play. Or, fine, I want to be able to go on vacation. Pardon me. And
Rona.
And so I think all these things are going to kind of culminate in getting a lot of people vaccinated.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered the FOMO aspect of this yet, but that is really good analysis on that, because that is a very big driver, because it's not a question that at that point it's not a question of do I want the vaccine or not, it's do I not want the vaccine enough to miss out on these other life events.
Oh yeah, a good friend of mine, I guarantee you, was the number one reason why he got the vaccine was just so he'd go back to doing the things that he wanted to do.
Yeah. And so let's I hear a lot of rhetoric around that being very 1984-esque and forcing. Do you find it to be us as a society?
Conservatives who quote Orwell don't know what Orwell wrote.
I mean, this is also true. Do you think that there should be some sort of choice out there to for example get tested or get vaxxed? So you don't.
No.
And why is that?
Because as we've learned about this disease, it mutates quickly. It's very easy to catch. It's very easy to spread. It doesn't show immediately, and the time that it takes between a test, okay, so for instance, I know plenty of people have different kinds of healthcare, and some of those healthcare offer rapid testing. Rapid testing isn't always as certain as the multi-day method, but that's another topic. I don't think it's nearly as effective in stopping the spread as vaccination. And with a disease as deadly as COVID-19 is, I don't think there's enough space there. I don't think the margin for loss and error is something we can accept.
So then do you think that these mandates will be effective at controlling the spread of the Delta variant?
I think if we're right in the sense that they will increase the vaccination rate, I think yes. Because as we've seen with the Delta variant, the initial vaccine is stopping infection of the Delta variant. It is stopping when people do get infected who have been vaccinated at that lowered rate. It is stopping the severity, or it is lowering the severity of the infection. It's lowering the amount of time that people are infected, and it's lowering the chances of hospitalization.
Mm-hmm.
And things like the amount of time that you're infected and the hospitalization are where spreads happen.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if our analysis around that FOMO aspect is correct, I'd agree with you. However, there is, for me, a very real sense that, like, you should get the vaccine because it's the right thing. It's the right thing to do. And so I don't for me, it's difficult to understand that aspect of it being like almost getting the vaccine for selfish reasons is very, very kind of bizarre to me. But I think that all told, if we're right about this, because I think you are right.
I think incentivization is a means that is justified by the ends, because the ends are the safety of a society as a whole and the safety of people who are much more susceptible to infections like these. I think the FOMO aspect is a means that is completely justifiable.
Yeah, and
yes, I would like everyone to have the exact same moral compass as me. No, I don't expect them.
No, not at all.
And as we've learned time and time again, I hate to use this as an example, but you look back to like things like World War II when we needed metal to build ships and guns and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
People had to be incentivized to turn in their vehicles, to allow the U.S. economy to stop producing on like a
manufacturing like goods and manufacturing, like wartime manufacturing. Sure.
People had to be convinced to allow the U.S. economy to transition from a civilian benefiting manufacturing process to a military benefiting manufacturing process primarily.
And we never stopped.
Yeah, we just never went back.
Alrighty, let's talk about the Compassion Seattle Amendment. Now, Dain, do you know anything about Compassion Seattle? Okay, so Compassion Seattle, and for you and for those of our listeners that don't know, it was a controversial bill that was slated to be on the November ballot and was struck down by a judge. Now, this bill, known as Charter Amendment 29, also known as this bill, known as Charter Amendment 29, aka Compassion Seattle, would have, among other measures, forced the city of Seattle to move the downtown unhoused population into housing within a year. It also mandated increased funding to social services and housing programs through the city of Seattle. The Charter Amendment was struck down as some of the measures involved would have gone above and beyond the power of the city into areas within the jurisdiction of the state. Thus, if it was on the November ballot and it passed, it would have functionally acted as the city of Seattle imposing its will on the rest of the state. While the name and mission of Compassion Seattle seems excellent, when you begin to understand the layers behind it, you realize that it is in fact a corporate push to sweep the failings of capitalism under the rug, because of course it is. Now, the bill was primarily funded by local businesses, landlords, both small and large, as well as real estate conglomerates. Many large nonprofits signed on to Compassion Seattle, but a coalition of the small and medium NGOs in the Seattle area that have been working with the homeless population for many years now sued the basically the coalition that brought the bill, Compassion Seattle. And in court, the judge ruled that the bill could not go on because it went beyond the scope of the city of Seattle. So their appeal to the Supreme Court of Washington has been denied, so this will not be on the ballot. However, that being said, one of the mayoral candidates, Bruce Harrell, said that Jenny Durkin, the mayor of Seattle, should enact the major pillars of Compassion Seattle immediately, and if she fails to do so, that if elected, he will. What does this tell us about kind of the state of Seattle, the state of Seattle's homelessness, as well as kind of the state of our politicians?
Well, I do think it's interesting that I think if the bill had results planned out that would have actually benefited people, truly benefited people, and increased the safety of the homeless population, I think I would have considered it pretty petty to attack it just because it was kind of it was a cover-up of some of the crappy stuff that capitalists have done. But I think ultimately the right decision was made because it is kind of a scapegoat, and it wouldn't ultimately do as much as we want it to do. And in reality, we need to be taking steps that are 100% effective. And
why aren't the steps that I laid out here, mandating that the city move find homes for the homeless population, funding social services, why are these issues, why shouldn't these be enacted?
Well, they should, but the way that they are enacted needs to be looked at a little closer. Mm-hmm. Because like you said, it's the people who are paying for it are going to be primarily business owners and landlords and things like that. But I guarantee you on the back end, it's going to be tax cuts. On the back end, it's going to be ultimately a benefit for these people.
It's also probably, I didn't read the text of the bill. My guess is that it would have raised, it wouldn't have raised their taxes nearly as much as it probably should. But my big issue here, and kind of the big issue that exists here, is that the government cannot do it all under our current structure. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the responsibilities, particularly around homelessness, have been delegated out to NGOs. What this bill functionally does is it cuts out the entire NGO community that is already doing work here and saying where we are demanding that the city of Seattle use its own funding through its own systems to solve this. Whereas you could have the same kind of bill that brings in the coalition of NGOs that does virtually the exact same thing, but the people that are already working on the ground outside the scope of the city of Seattle
have in place.
Exactly.
Use the people who actually give a shit.
What these business owners did is they saw a problem and went to the city of Seattle and demanded that they reinvent the wheel and completely change the process that frankly has been put in place by neoliberals. That's a whole nother conversation we can get into, but what it really comes down to is it's the privatization of the jobs of the government that the government should be doing, but they've privatized. Now, NGOs, by and large, are considered private entities, not public entities. Yes, they are subject to certain public disclosure requirements, but generally, a lot of times they are worked with and viewed as part of the private sector, not the public sector. So if Compassion Seattle were to come back and include these members, include these NGOs, not just the big ones, but the smaller ones as well, working in the communities, then this would be a much more viable bill because we'd have an actual structure that has fingers in the community as opposed to just the city of Seattle and the city of Seattle workers.
Yeah. So, as it stands, it would probably take forever to get this kind of whole plan done. As the bill stands, yes. It would take 1,000,000 years.
Yes, because again, they'd have to reinvent the wheel. All the people that are actually doing good work on this, not to say that they
could continue to do good work on this, but they wouldn't be a part of the greater task that's actually going to affect change, and therefore the greater task probably wouldn't affect so much change.
Exactly. And so ultimately, like, Compassion Seattle is a piece of legislation that is good, that I would encourage to be reintroduced, but to really consider not just what the state can do under the current neoliberal regime, but actually look at what the other folks around NGOs are able to also contribute.
So we want to see Compassion Seattle reintroduced as a coalition of NGOs that are fighting to end homelessness in the Seattle area.
Exactly. And go to the city of Seattle instead of the owners of shops going to the city of Seattle saying this is what we need, the NGOs dictating that, saying this is what we need the city to do in order for us to successfully address the homelessness situation.
And that comes down to also what people's priorities are, because the priorities and the motives of the NGOs is to increase the quality of life of the homeless people of Seattle and get them out of that muck and mire. The priorities of business owners and landlords in Seattle with pertinence to this is these people are ruining my property value.
And again, it's compassionate capitalism, right?
Exactly.
Like this is the definition, literally in the name.
We don't want to kill them. We could want to kill them, but we don't want to kill them. Just give them a house, right? That's
we
what
just
want
to
hear?
we just want to shovel them all into.
It's the same idea as like shipping them off to another city. It's like, you're trash. Help these people.
Yeah. It's not going to actually address the material, like, frankly, the cyclical position that a lot of these folks are in, that is like, do they need mental health treatment first? Do they need a job first?
Yeah.
Like, there's
plenty of homeless people that just need, like, the job offer, just need the P.O. box and the job offer, or the mailing address and the job offer and the place to sleep. Like, there's plenty of homeless people that could get out of homelessness in a year and a half of giving them that. But that's not all homeless people, not by a long shot.
No, not even
Most
close.
people who experience homelessness or are affected by homelessness need so much more than just that. And it's not their fault for needing that, and it shouldn't be considered as a problem that they need that. It is our failing as a society that we continue to disregard and disrespect people who are in need. And Compassion Seattle needs to be reorganized to address all of these issues, and not just another bullshit Band-Aid on the major crisis that is homelessness.
So let's circle back after this conversation about the actual content of the bill. Let's talk a little bit about this politician demanding that this hits so harsh.
It does.
It's
heavy.
I really like it.
Let me tap.
So there's this politician Bruce Harrell, who is definitely not the CWP's choice in the race, is demanding that Durkin implement large pillars of the plan. Do you think that would be effective? Like, do you think that like looking through it, being like, okay, some of this stuff would be helpful, would work?
Having not read it, I'm sure there are aspects of it that could be enacted soon. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't have the greater plan set up and put in motion, those smaller aspects are not going to do any good. The building the housing, say that's one of it. Say that's part of it. Start building the housing for these people. It's going to turn out like Section 8. It's going to turn out not like decent Section 8 like we see in some parts of it, like shit Section 8 like you see in downtown Chicago, and
it's going to be a set it and forget it policy.
Absolutely. And if that's the whole,
especially with a name like Compassion Seattle.
Well, all Section 8, all low-income housing, I've noticed, all have these really sweet names. These really pretty, lovely names, like Helping Hands this, or A Place for the People this. but they're all shitholes because they're not taken care of properly, because the right policies haven't been put into effect to continue to increase these people's quality of life, to continue to help these people past just the bare minimum. And so what's clearly being hoped for is that this guy can usher in some gusto by being like, no, we need to do this now, da 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 da. And when in reality, he's actually really fighting against the ultimate cause.
Yeah, and I think it's really obvious that this is just a means to capitalize, because Compassion Seattle was very, very popular. It was controversial for sure if you knew anything about the NGO, but like at face value, it looks really good.
Yeah, for sure.
And so there was definitely a lot of folks in the Seattle area behind it. Including there was a couple of the larger NGOs were behind it, but again, it's those small and medium NGOs that are also doing a lot of that similar work that were like, y'all are about to fuck us with this.
Yeah.
And so ultimately what this politician is doing here is trying to capitalize off that momentum for his campaign. So that's really interesting, especially because the two politicians that are running for mayor are, I forget the other lady's name, but she's partially indigenous, if not completely indigenous.
Let's go.
She was very much against Compassion Seattle. So
I love things like this that we realize are bad and they become litmus tests, because lawmakers and politicians know whether or not these things are shitty. They know if these things are going to be... They leave it up to people like us and other organizations like the NGOs to find out that they're going to be shitty and to tell people that they're going to be shitty. But politicians and lawmakers who know they're going to capitalize off of things like this are completely more than willing to support them, even though they're bullshit. And so when we find out something like this is garbage, we can kind of use it as a litmus test for politicians and lawmakers and just be like, how long have you supported this shit?
Mm-hmm. It's great. I mean, and I'd recommend, there's a lot of great litmus tests out there. My favorite one is the Israel-Palestine. If you haven't read Except for Palestine by Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, he talks about it, in fact, being a litmus test. Like, you have to be consistent in your policies and in your beliefs, and that's why following a party like a Democratic Party, you're just not, because the Democratic Party is not interested in consistency and creating a specific world that is livable, but they're interested in maintaining power, and that means neoliberalism.
That's why your litmus test can never be the politician themselves,
or their party.
That's
why
you have to use a bill or some piece of law as the litmus test, and that way, because you have to go in, do your own research on that piece of work, and find out if it will be beneficial the way it's supposed to be beneficial, and then look at who has supported it and who hasn't supported it.
Yeah.
And that's how you can tell who you should be voting for.
Absolutely. That is one of the most effective ways of doing it, but I will caution saying that it has to be the right piece of legislation, because if it's like a resolution that resolved that all puppies are cute, like that's...
Yeah, of course. It has to be something that actually...
It has to be something that kind of divides the Democratic, particularly when we're talking about local politicians here in Seattle or in entire Cascadia. It has to be an issue that is dividing the liberal bloc, if you will, of voters, because that's where you're going to see.
At least if you want to vote like us.
Yeah, because that's where you're going to see the separation.
Yeah, if your goal is to be like leftist, you just find the piece of legislation that divides the Democratic Party and really creates the parting of the sea between leftists and neoliberals, and then find out who's been pro this bill for a long time and who's been not so pro this bill the entire time.
Who's been in bed with big business.
Yeah, exactly. And it leads right back to the money. It's a trail of money that leads back to a vault full of coins that Scrooge McDuck swims in.
Just the skeleton of Scrooge McDuck.
Just In a floaty.
Yeah.
Laid back with a big hat and a martini in his hand.
At the end of the day, I am really I have mixed feelings about Compassion Seattle being struck down, because on one hand I do see like there could the potential benefits of it, but on the other hand there are very, very real flaws that make me glad that this iteration has been struck down. But I'm very hopeful because it shows that we're all on the same, I mean, we've all been on the same page that something needs to happen, but it allows, you know, a way for striking it down allows a reimagining of this that is significantly more inclusive than the original bill. Okay. And let's move down to Oregon and talk about the Nabisco Strike, because that's kind of been on our radar before we took our unexpected hiatus, and we were going to come back and talk about that the following week. That didn't materialize, which is actually kind of a good thing, because when that strike first started, it was just the Nabisco plant. About 12 days into it, after we would have initially talked about it, about 4 or 5 other plants across the United States have also gone on strike. Nabisco plants have gone on strike. So you got a lot of different. You have, for the first time in a long time, a strike that is going on that is affecting multiple manufacturing sites, which is fascinating to me, because this is how unions are supposed to function. Mm-hmm. Not to mention that other unions such as the Electrical Workers Union, IBEW, they have agreed to not cross the line. So that's really, really awesome. Let's talk about it a little bit more, though. So shortly before we took our break, we were looking at this story. So the strike began on August 10th, almost a month ago now, and is still ongoing. After workers belonging to the bakery, confectionery, tobacco workers, and grain millers. So, these used to all be separate unions, right? And have now just been smushed together. Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. So this is the bakery, confectionery, tobacco workers, and grain millers union.
It's another big problem with unions is the conglomerization of them.
Well, yeah, that's definitely been intentional.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's all part of the nerfing of unions, but...
So, BCTGM Local 364 were unable to come to an agreement with Mondelez International, the Chicago-based owner of Nabisco, and walked out on August 10th. Workers at the Nabisco plant in North Portland and across the country have worked since the start of the pandemic, increasing production to meet increased demands and facilitating record profits for the company. I mean, Nabisco was good to me for the pandemic, not gonna lie. Across the country, Nabisco has laid off half of its union workforce, that's approximately 1,000 people. It has shut down plants in Atlanta, New Jersey, and hired people in plants in Central and South America. According to union organizers, a huge sticking point in the negotiations with Nabisco was that Nabisco itself wanted to increase staffing to support 7-day alternating shift work weeks and remove overtime pay for weekends. So, kind of a sticking point for a union, even if they're toothless, that's gonna be a problem.
Yeah,
it's gonna be a fucking problem. Okay, so while Portland was the first Nabisco factory to strike, 5 other factories across the U.S. have joined in striking. BCTGM Local 26 is striking in Denver, Colorado, after Nabisco violated Fair Labor Standard Acts by trying to negotiate directly with workers. Cool.
Wow.
Local 358 in Richmond and Local 1 in Chicago, which is again where Nabisco their headquarters is, have also joined the strike, walking out of their respective facilities. With the inclusion of Chicago, BCTGM has reported that all major Nabisco bakeries are now on strike in the U.S.
Good.
Mondelez International said that it was disappointed with the strike, adding that it felt the deal would have led to future investment and long-term success. I was just like, yeah.
It would have given us plenty of time to move all of our production south of the border.
Many Democratic politicians have come out in favor of the protest. Danny DeVito is in favor of the protest. And production is continuing in the factories where workers are on strike. And Nabisco tells consumers that there will be no supply line disruptions because being scab is now legal. So obviously, don't buy Nabisco, punch a scab.
Burn down their car.
What are some things that jump out to you about this strike that might be different than some of the other collective bargaining actions we've talked about in the past?
I think we see a really dope, broad strike here, which is something you don't see as much nowadays. Like a lot of times,
very rare. I'm writing this. I was trying to think of the last time I've seen this.
It's been a long time since like a national strike has happened for an industry. Or not an industry, but for a specific union. But it's still nerfed. Because previously, what would happen is, like, a union would represent not just these Nabisco people. So, like, you would have other companies having their warehouses and their places, their bakeries, go on strike in support of Nabisco, the Nabisco workers.
Yeah.
And that's where you get pressure. This is a game of pressure. There has to be pressure put on Nabisco to change what they've been doing and stop taking jobs away from the U.S. and start paying the U.S. workers what they're owed.
So the pressure comes from what's a Nabisco competitor? I'm not in the biscuit making game. Whatever.
Keebler?
Sure, let's go with Keebler.
But they have magic on their side.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck. We got socialism.
Yeah. Also, those elves are definitely disenfranchised.
Oh yeah, those elves are on our side, 100%.
For sure. They have to live in a tree.
Well, actually, think about being a Keebler worker, and you're like, they're like comparing you to elves and shit.
Unfortunately, I do think I have a strong inclination that Keebler is a Nabisco company.
Yeah, it might be. Now that you mention it,
I have no idea who, but that's another huge issue. Is these companies are so massive that it's hard to hurt them. Between scabbing being completely legal, between the lack of pressure that we can put on them by multi-company and multi-organization and multi-industry strikes, this is why a general strike is really the only way to gain true power anymore.
Yeah. Speaking of which, is there any updated information about the general strike?
Oh, dude, it's a mess.
Is it?
Yeah, there was infighting within the October Strike group, and it's. I'll update everyone on it in a week. How about that? I'll do a little research on it and update everyone in a week.
Okay, that sounds
good.
Messy,
and I've been kind of sifting through all of it, but it's.
I had to hop off TikTok for a while.
Yeah,
I hopped off TikTok about a month and a half ago, and it's been. I'll get back on there eventually, but you know, yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned though, and I really want to highlight this point, is the fact that other companies would also go on strike.
Yeah.
As we were trying to figure out a competitor to Nabisco, which was actually just a terrifying exercise now that we've completed it. But the other companies would then basically force their capitalist to come to this capitalist and be like, hey, bud, like you're fucking with my money now.
Exactly.
So,
and it would be a pressure because we'd be affecting capitalists as a whole, as a group, as a class. Mm-hmm. So then we make them infight as opposed to them making us infight.
Exactly, which is something that they've been very successful at, and I'm sure that the infighting in the October strike group or October general strike group is very much a psyop.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I said, I'll dive into it in a week.
Well, with that, because we're already almost at an hour and a half, let's talk about our last Oregon story. Basically, don't takeaways from that story. Don't scab. This is a really cool movement. I wish we could spend more time on it today, but we still got a lot to cover. We'll definitely update you as the strike resolves itself. I'm not terribly hopeful. Nabisco's already made moves to move their workforce out of the U.S. This is probably just going to accelerate that. Unfortunately,
because of the scabbing.
Because of the scabbing, this is unfortunately very likely to accelerate and just force more Nabisco factories to close down and for them to move out of the U.S. And it's too easy for companies to be able to do that. We need to make that harder so that ordinary people, unions, and
that has to be a pincer movement. It has to be a multi-pronged strike between the workforce and forcing our lawmakers to enact policies that affect businesses for moving their workforce out of the U.S. I feel like taking jobs from Americans is like this big conservative talking point until it's actually happening, and then nobody gives a shit.
Well, that's because the conservatives are the ones that have created the laws to incentivize this. Like, that comes from Reagan. Like, if you do some reading into the impact of Reagan's policies,
Reaganomics.
I'm gonna just reach over there and slap you.
Robot Reaganomics 80s.
If you look at the impact of those policies, that's where a lot of this comes from.
Yeah.
Like, Reagan did so much to damage, American manufacturing. It's nuts. And neoliberals did too with globalization. Globalization is very much a more neoliberal thing than it is a conservative thing. So, like, economically, both parties are absolutely fucked.
In conclusion, gross.
There we go. Let's talk about gerrymandering in Oregon. Another gross story. So the census data is all in, and the promise of a new congressman has been given to Oregon because they have been expanding at an incredible rate. This week, both the Oregon House and Senate released their initial maps for redistricting. Oregon has grown in population and is now adding a new district representative in the federal House of Representatives. This means that they have to create new district borders, and the fight is going to be particularly tricky because the additional district can be literally anywhere in the state. So that's going to be a whole thing. There are two different sets of maps that are out right now. There is the House Republican maps, which you can see up here because we now have a green screen, and I can say that. And on the left, you can see the Democrat maps. Very different maps. Now, the House Republican maps creates a competitive 6th district based around the Portland suburbs, where you will generally find a higher concentration of class traders. Neoliberal. Class traders, whatever, The Republican map would also create 2 strong Democratic districts, 2 strong Republican districts, and another conservative-leaning but competitive swingish district. The Democrats, instead of creating a perceived balanced map, have created another strong Democratic district with their additional one, and likely with their map would go 5-1 Democrat to conservative. With one large conservative district comprising most of eastern Oregon. While neither plan is set in stone, Labor-affiliated group Our Oregon issued a press release stating that the Republican maps were, quote, brazenly attempting to gerrymander Oregon, end quote. Currently, Democrats enjoy a 4-1 supermajority in Congress, but adopting the Republican map could result in a 3-4 split with Republicans taking over. On paper, Dain, and you can't actually see the map right now, but you'll see it in post. On paper, it feels like the Republican map is a more fair split, as the Democratic map would almost guarantee a 5-1 split. Do you think the Republicans in Oregon are more equitable, or is there a deeper plan here?
I think, based on the fact that we currently operate under a supermajority for Democrats, I think obviously the goal is to make it like more competitive, but I think any kind of the issue with Oregon is Democratic voters are very centralized in 2 places, Portland and Eugene. These are and unfortunately the rest of the state is very sparsely populated, but almost exclusively populated with Republican voters. Now, the voting comes down to fairly democratic because of the population of these two places, Portland and Eugene. But the talking point of Republicans is we live on more of the land. It goes back to like land ownership gives me value.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, just because these people who live in these cities do not own large swaths of land does not discount their right to have their voices heard.
No, but you see, they aren't as meritorious. They don't have the same.
They haven't bootstrapped themselves
Exactly.
enough to earn the money and buy the land.
Exactly. You know, and if
they're not willing to participate in this world, then what use are they? We should just get rid of them. Why are they allowed to vote?
Exactly. You know, and at the end of the day, you know,
why do people in the Pacific Northwest who vote Republican have an accent?
I don't know.
Why do they have a Southern accent? They do. I guarantee you they do. I've met them.
Yeah, it's not a dig or anything. It is a
they have a Southern accent. It's weird.
It's very, very wild.
Anyways,
like, and not all of them, but the ones that are like, there some of the folks that are like about it truly are, and it is kind of wild.
Yeah, it's crazy
because it's like it's clearly affected because it's not like a good Southern accent either.
No, it's bad.
Like
Washington is something that comes to mind.
Yeah, it's, you know, I don't know why that is the case, but that is a very, very real phenomena. But yeah, on paper it seems like the Republicans are going for a more fair split here, but in reality, is that representative of the population? And should we be basing our maps off of representation of the population, or should we be trying to create, you know, reasonably balanced maps?
No, exactly. And like, it's the problem with drawing physical lines to represent people who do not live it. Like, sure, if the population of Oregon was separated evenly across the entire state, yeah, draw like pretty even lines. It's like draw 2 lines going this way and 2 lines going that way, and you got your map, and that's the districts. But it's not that way. Like, it's similar to Washington in the sense that a massive majority of the people live in a small area, and if you draw the map based on areas of land, these people are going to be disenfranchised. The people who live in these cities are going to be disenfranchised. They're going to lose their voice.
At the same time, if you were to go to a direct democracy where basically a lot of the power would lie in the cities, you're going to disenfranchise a lot of those outside voters. So with that in mind, do you think gerrymandering is archaic? Do you think there's a better way we could be doing this?
I mean, we've talked about gerrymandering before. I think third-party map drawing is an option.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not educated enough to know the right way to go about it, but I know that right now the way we go about it is just a power struggle. It's not an attempt to properly represent the people. It is an attempt to pull power to one side or the other.
And ultimately, neither of these maps have been finalized, and they are very partisan because of that. Because, you know, the Democrats want to control their supermajority, and the Republicans want to cut into that as much as they can. Because I think everybody recognizes that Oregon's not going to be going blue here anytime soon, unless we do a really masterful job jerry-rigging the state, or gerrymandering. Either way,
same thing.
It works either way. I think that ultimately this is a long strategy. I think that they know that the final maps are going to heavily favor Democrats because they have the majority. There is a history in the United States of both the Republicans and Democrats using gerrymandering to strengthen their positions, and ultimately, at the end of the day, what the local Republicans are going to be able to do in Oregon are say that, hey, we offered a fair map, and the Democrats rejected it, and so, you know, we're fair, we're the party of equity here, not the Democrats. So I see that happening, and frankly, I don't actually disagree with them, because like if the tables were turned, and the Democrats were trying to offer somewhat of a more fair map, and the Republicans were jerry-rigging the district, like, yeah, that'd be fucked up too. And it is because there are places where that happened. Texas, there are places where that happens all over the place, literally all over the South. And, yeah, like it's very, very prominent that both sides do this.
Yeah, it's another one of those situations where it's just like, why do people want to live in places where they don't have equity? Like, I mean
that's true. Like that's just the United States.
It is, but like, for instance, I'm a leftist voter. I live in Washington because I know more often than not my voice and my opinions are going to be the one that as a state we agree upon and decide upon and send to Congress. But like, and it's like in Texas, it's like they're pieces of shit. So like they do piece of shit things and they send pieces of shit to Congress and they talk about piece of shit stuff.
I had a nightmare where I met Ted Cruz last night.
Gross, dude. Oh, the only benefit would be murder.
Well,
or beating him in one-on-one basketball.
Beating him on one-on-one, that'd be pretty tight. I just beat him.
Exactly. But it just it's a real big mess that I am not equipped to solve.
Mm-hmm.
But I am more than well equipped to say that neither of these parties is fighting for equity. They're fighting for power.
Yeah, they're fighting for, and that's the key here. Is neither of these parties are in this fight for the actual representation piece. They're fighting for what that representation means for them, which is the consolidation of power. And there's got to be a better way of doing this, and whether that's third party map drawing. But then that gets into the question of like, okay, well, where's that money coming?
Who's paying that third party?
Who's paying that third party? Who designed the methodology? This is something that in my work, because I work in consulting, which is basically privatized academia. We do a lot of work with like methodology and stuff. It's like, okay, was this methodology written by a conservative person? That, because then you have a conservative leaning methodology that's going to likely favor conservatives, as opposed to so like understanding those issues as well, it just adds so much to it. Welcome back to the show. That was Let Them Eat War by Bad Religion, who, if you do not know, will be in Cascadia playing in Seattle on November 22nd and Portland on November 23rd. I will be in Seattle, so if you want to hang out, we're going to be at the Seattle show. Alrighty. Let's talk about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Well, let's talk about the Afghanistan pullout. Biden's pullout game. Yeah, that's the one we're going to go with. Let's talk about Biden's pullout game. So, a lot of the rhetoric around the last several weeks and a lot of the reporting is focused on the last 20 years of the United States' involvement in Afghanistan. Today, we're going to take a look at the last 40 or 50 years of foreign policy in Afghanistan, to gain a picture as to why, in fact, Biden's pullout of Afghanistan went off without a hitch. That's not to say that there wasn't tragic loss of life at the Kabul airport. 13 U.S. service members died there. That is an absolute tragedy and a travesty. But the way that the pullout was executed and the lives that were lost were all part of a calculated plan. Maybe not intended that there would be, those 13 service members' loss of life, but leaving people behind, particularly folks that assisted the United States, was always part of the plan.
Well, yeah, what you have to understand in our entire conversation about this is our acceptable margin for loss is not the same as the U.S.'s acceptable margin for loss. So when we talk about what... in this conversation we're going to talk about a lot about like how the plan was written up and what the acceptable margin of loss was, and just understand that that's not our acceptable margin of loss. We don't like or want to see loss of life, especially of service members, but understand that the U.S. calculates that shit in.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, what happened here is setting up the next time that we go into the Middle East, because this is not the first time we've pulled out of the Middle East, and it frankly is not going to be the last. So let's go back all the way to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This is, before the Soviet Union fell, all the way back in 1978. The centrist government of Afghanistan was overthrown by a left-wing coup. Power was shared between two communist groups, but due to the authoritarian methods intrinsic in early 20th century communism, a disparate band of rebel fighters began opposing the authoritarian regime. These rebel fighters were then would go on to be funded and supported by the United States, particularly by Ronald Reagan. These folks became known as the Mujahideen. The authoritarian government of Afghanistan was unable to quell the revolution, so in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded. The United States materially supported the Mujahideen with weapons, in keeping with the United States policy on stopping the spread of communism wherever it went. After over a decade of fighting, the dissolving Soviet Union agreed to pull out of Afghanistan, fracturing the Mujahideen fighters into a multiplicity of groups, because their ultimate goal of pushing Soviet Russia out, or so the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan, had been met. One of the Islamic groups that emerged from the Mujahideen were the Taliban. This brings us to the Iran Contra. That's going to be 1986 through 87 is when this happened. So there's a lot that goes on here. So first of all, you have Iran as a key player, and you have the Nicaraguan Contras as a key player of this. So pay close attention to this if you aren't familiar with the Iran Contra, because this is kind of the crux of the United States foreign policy and has been our MO in Afghanistan ever since. So in the late 80s, before they unified against the United States, Iraq and Iran were at war with one another, and Lebanon had taken over 104 hostages from 21 different countries between 1982 and held them between 1982 and 1992. Many were American, and Reagan campaigned on bringing them home. This is the Lebanese hostage crisis that you may remember from your childhood. In order to try to win influence with Iran, Reagan offered to sell weapons to the Iranians. In exchange, they pressured for the release of hostages in Lebanon. So essentially what would happen is Reagan would sell weapons to Iran, and then Iran, on behalf of the United States, would pressure Lebanon to release the hostages. So that's kind of the foreign policy mashup that's happening in Iran. So then there's the Nicaraguan Contras come in. So in the late 70s, the Socialist Sandinista Liberation Front, do you notice a common theme about the people that the U.S. is fighting? In the late 70s, the Socialist Sandinista Liberation Front overthrew the autocratic Somoza Garcia family, who were close allies of the United States. This led to the Contra Revolution, in which the American-backed Nicaraguan Contras waged a civil war against the Sandinista Liberation Front. Despite the last 20 years of foreign policy, the power to declare and maintain wars as well as fund them belongs to Congress and not the president. You might not know that growing up post 9/11. In 1985, Congress decided to stop funding the Contras. This is important because this is before the agreement with Iran. They agreed to stop funding the Contras. So Reagan went around Congress to funnel money from arms sales to the Contras to keep fighting the Sandistas against the will of Congress. Okay, so here's where the scandal all plays out. Okay, the United States had a long-standing policy that it doesn't bargain with terrorists, doesn't bargain for hostages. The funding of the Contras had been behind the back of Reagan was funding the Contras behind the back of Congress, which was not only illegal, it violated and explicitly enumerated power of Congress. That means it was literally unconstitutional, not in the term like, oh, I don't like that, I don't like that thing that this business is doing, that's unconstitutional. This is literally unconstitutional within the articles of the Constitution, not the amendments. This is core stuff. And it did not lead to any hostages being released. It did not lead to the overthrow of the Sandistas in Nicaragua, and it did not war the end between Iraq and Iran. The Reagan administration lost face across and the Republican Party lost power. So to walk it through, because I realize I haven't done that yet, what Reagan was doing was essentially taking weapons and selling them to the Nicaraguans, taking arms, selling them to the Iranians at an inflated price, and funneling money to the Nicaraguans. Yes, that is the correct flow. It was either one way or the other. So weapons sold in Iran at a premium. That money goes back to the U.S. government, that then funneled that to the Sandistas in Nicaragua. So that is the Iran Contra. None of this was legal or constitutional. So that kind of leads us into the Gulf War. Now, there are a few key players in the Gulf War. Particularly, you have Iraq, NATO, led by the United States and Britain, are kind of some of the key players. So in the 90s, Iraq was led by Saddam Hussein, a secular dictator with a nasty mean streak. By the 90s, a tentative ceasefire had been reached between Iraq and Iran, because remember, they were at war during the Iran Contra. At this point, they're a little bit, they're at more peace. No permanent peace had yet been reached, but Saddam was willing to come to the table. Shortly before negotiations were about to start, Saddam began making claims that Kuwait was siphoning oil from Iraqi oil fields. That's one of Iraq's neighbors, is Kuwait. And Saddam began amassing troops at the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border. Hosni Mubarak, the Democratic-elected president of Egypt, attempted to mediate an agreement between Iraq and Kuwait in an effort to avoid involving Western powers, probably the single smartest policy move in this entire story. Saddam wasn't having any of it and walked out after 2 hours of negotiations, and in August 1990 ordered the invasion of Kuwait. Saddam expected other members of the Arab League to support him. Nearly 2/3 of the 21 members did not support him. So he was really on his own on this. Saudi Arabia and the government of Kuwait turned to NATO for support. Bad move. Which meant U.S. intervention. So this prompted two operations, which are well known in the American zeitgeist: Operation Desert Storm and the lesser known Operation Desert Shield. Started with Desert Shield, actually. The United States government, British government, and the Soviet Union all condemned the actions of Saddam. In Operation Desert Shield, the United States bolstered the fighting capabilities of Kuwait, bringing in a state-of-the-art Air Force to teach... They brought in state-of-the-art Air Force and tech to defend the country against the Iraqi invasion. In response, Saddam moved an additional 300,000 occupying troops into Kuwait. In a bid to win over the Arab League, Saddam declared jihad on the West. Again, Saddam was a secular guy up until this point. So then he's like putting on the Pope hat and just being like, I too am a Muslim. That has always been secular. Being a secularist this didn't impress anybody because, again, he'd been secular the entire time. So that led to Desert Storm. Now, Desert Storm was the equivalent of bringing the Super Bowl champs to play against a Pee-wee football team. It's worth noting that while Operation Desert Storm was a U.S.-led operation, members from most, if not all, NATO nations were present. The United States led an assault on the Iraqi Air Force in Kuwait beginning on January 17, 1991. This was the first use of a full-scale modern war machines, including the newly minted cruise missiles, stealth fighters, stealth bombers, and a various other assortment of demonstrable hegemonic military power. The Iraqi Air Force, the ones that did take to their planes were quickly shot down, and the rest of them were just like, nope. Which, again, understandable. A month in, the Iraqi Air Force was completely disseminated, and the Air Force began attacks on ground forces while U.S. and NATO ground forces hit the Iraqi armor from behind. So they just hit them with that classic pincher. While this war was supposed to have minimal impact according to the policy statements at the time, repercussions are felt to this day. Saddam survived, and Kuwait was constantly afraid of being invaded again, which led to troop buildups on both sides over the next decade. The invasion of Iraq 10 years later by the United States and British forces was in fact staged out of, you guessed it, Kuwait. And this brings us up to when we're young lads in grade school. It would have been kindergarten for me, probably grade school for you. The towers came down.
Yeah, it was 2001, I think, 4th or 5th grade.
Yeah, I was like maybe first grade. I was homeschooled, so I genuinely don't know. But yeah, I was around like kindergarten, first grade when that. Yeah, maybe second.
You don't have to try to figure out what grade you were in. It's okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Anyway, so when 9/11 happened, Osama bin Laden had a belief that the United States was weak and was going to fracture, would not be able to go back into Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, all the places that we ended up going back into. He made a huge miscalculation and nobody backed him up. But it's important to note that the Mujahideen fighters have been present in Afghanistan this entire time, fracturing and changing their names. This continues to happen to this day. But after the Soviet Union left and they still wanted, to push out Western influence, then they became terrorists. That's where the heritage of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda come from, is from the Mujahideen fighters that the United States materially supported for many, many, many years. And then was the justification for us to go back in after the towers. And then the justification to stay in was that under Bush was that there were nuclear weapons. Under Obama, we were still hunting for Osama bin Laden. Trump began to actually start looking at pulling us out. And the one good thing that I will say that came out of the Trump presidency was that he, in fact, did avoid a war with Iran, where I genuinely believe Hillary Clinton would have gotten us involved in a war. That doesn't mean that he was a good. I don't think that he was a good president. I agree with any of his rhetoric about these areas. He's
a deplorable human being.
Basically, what I'm saying is a broken clock gets right twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, we go into the last 20 years of our.
A broken clock is right at least 2 times a day, but Donald Trump was a broken digital 24-hour clock, right? 1 time a day.
One time a day. Okay, that's fair. I was just using the idiom. So in the Bush years, 9/11 obviously happens, which was perpetrated by Al-Qaeda, a radical offshoot of the Taliban. On the Al-Qaeda side, this was a global operation spanning countries, continents, and all coordinated out of Afghanistan. And this led to the United States military intervention in Afghanistan. In his famous Axis of Evil speech, Bush Sr. indicated Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq were all fomenting terrorism and accused Iraq of harboring weapons of mass destruction. This pursuit against terrorism became known as the Global War on Terror, which is allegedly ongoing to this day. And it was the justification for invading Iraq and Iran to finish his daddy's work. Keep in mind that when everything was happening in Desert Storm against Saddam, that was Bush Sr.
Bush Sr., yeah.
And so there's a very interesting point here that, he went in and very much finished his dad's job by essentially capturing Saddam, who was ultimately executed by his own people.
Yeah, and
because Saddam was a bad guy. There's no question about it.
And it was 100% obviously facilitated by Dick Cheney, who was didn't he own Halliburton?
No, he had a stake in Halliburton.
Okay, but like a big fucking stake.
Yeah. No, so he didn't just have a couple shares in Halliburton.
It was a 2-prong effort between Bush doing his dad's work,
wanting to make dad proud,
and then Cheney, who was like, I can help
you make your dad proud.
Yeah, dude, and I can make billions and trillions of dollars for the military-industrial complex, for the war machine in America in doing so that when I'm out of office, I'm still a gazillionaire.
So then Obama comes in and takes over after Bush. we really expected at the time as a country that, okay, the war's functionally over. We don't have to be staying in here for much longer. Mm-hmm. Obama made it perfectly clear that ISIS was a extreme threat. Again, ISIS, a radical offshoot of Al-Qaeda, a radical offshoot of the Taliban, a radical offshoot of, you guessed it, the Mujahideen. At what point does the United States stop being culpable for that? We keep going in to fight them.
The culpability does not lessen, it multiplies.
Because we keep going in to fight them, the problem that we created.
Yeah.
So that was the Obama years. Then the Trump years we all just lived through. So that brings us now to kind of this eternal war status that we very much feel like we're in. Now, over the last few weeks, we've pulled out of Afghanistan. But the fact of the matter is that we're going to be going back in here in the future because of how we have pulled out of Afghanistan. So over the course of the United States war in Afghanistan, there were approximately 300,000 Americans and American proxies. That includes local support, translators, all that within Afghanistan. This successful airlift that the liberals are touting as, Trump sold Afghanistan to the Taliban, but Biden put an end to the war and pulled us out, and pulled all the Americans out. Again, 300,000 Americans and locals. The most liberal estimates indicate 116,700 people have been evacuated out of Afghanistan. That is less than half that number. So imagine, if you will, with me, let's do a little bit of a thought exercise. Let's say you're a young man in Afghanistan. Your parents have been U.S. translators for the last 20 years and have been helping out. You've been given the promise of coming to the United States and being a part of the United States. And then Biden pulls out of Afghanistan, which is fantastic news for you because your family finally gets to live the American dream. You get to come to the United States and be a part of the United States labor force. That's a whole nother story. But then you don't get included on that flight out. Then you watch your parents get executed by the Taliban. Now, you might not go join the Taliban. In fact, you probably won't go join the Taliban.
I mean, they killed your parents, so probs nah.
So then you're left with, other organizations like ISIS to go join. Or you can join, the local freedom fighters that are fighting for the ideals that the Americans left behind. So what are you going to do in that situation? You've lost everything. What are you going to do? You're going to go join one of these organizations and fight. And so you've now, by doing this, created more terrorists, more people that are willing to fight against the United States and not actually made our nation any more secure.
That's the U.S.'s MO, though. That's kind of our thing. We go in and fuck up a place and create more disdain for us.
Exactly. That's been our MO since Korea.
Yeah, since Korea.
Yeah. So basically right after World War II was the last time we legitimately did good in the world. Mm-hmm. And wasn't just looking after our own national interest. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing for the United States to look out for its national interest. I'm saying it's a bad thing to make our national interests other people's military problem.
Well, it's just like everything we talk about here, right? It's even though there may be benefits to the process that's been proposed, the number of people whose lives are ruined or who are disenfranchised in general in our process is not an acceptable margin for us.
Exactly. And so with that, let's take a real quick look at the U.S. spend on defense companies, and I am hoping we'll be able to put a graphic up here for this one too.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at...
Just gotta find one.
I have a bunch of stuff pulled. Cool. Let's look at the rise of defense companies. The real winners in Afghanistan are not Al-Qaeda, who are now left with the realities of running a country, and not the American people, but in fact defense contractors. In 2002, the United States spent just under $400 billion in defense spending. The most it spent over the next 20 years was $752 billion. That's $352 billion more in 2011 under Obama. If current trends keep up, next year will set a new record under Biden. In 2000, the average share of Lockheed Martin was $26 a share. In 2021, it's $364. That's over a 21-year period. Lockheed Martin has gone up that much. The taxpayer tab for the war totals about $5 trillion, or about $16,000 per person. All in all, this war has been incredibly lucrative for defense contractors. And that's the real tea about Afghanistan. The fact of the matter is that we have manufactured, the United States has manufactured the problem in Afghanistan in very real ways, has exacerbated the problems in Afghanistan in very real ways, and will not have to suffer the consequences like the people of Afghanistan will. So Dain, how much of this was like history that you knew? What were you familiar with?
I mean, I was taught plenty of this history, but not in the same way that we're learning it now, right? So the American education system does a real good job of covering up how shitty America is.
It's actually, that's a really interesting point, because that's why I've been thinking about that. Like, why do people see schools as being very liberal places when they're not? Like, you have to like, if you talk to an average, let's say you talk to an average conservative voter, not Trump voter, a conservative voter, they're going to a lot of them are going to look at schools as a Marxist institution designed to create leftists. The fact of the matter of going through those institutions, if you want that information, you have to seek that out yourself. That is nowhere taught in the core curriculum.
No. In reality, the American education system is a propaganda institution designed to create nationalists. Especially
the school system. The collegiate system, marginally less so. This collegiate system is more designed to create capitalists, neoliberals.
Yeah, exactly. Because the collegiate system starts to introduce the idea of teaching yourself, and kind of gives you the rein on what you're teaching yourself.
Yeah, very much so. Which is, there's a lot to get into, like in classism within the education system and all that. But you're right. The learning about this stuff is just not very you don't learn about this very frequently.
Yeah.
What do you hope that our audience understands from this? What do you think are some big takeaways as leftists when we look at United States intervention in places? What are lessons we can learn from how we've operated here?
Well, first of all, I think it's important, if you're going to glean anything from this story that we're covering here, that it's just anything that the government is telling us about war is propaganda. And we have to do our own research when it comes to our foreign affairs, in order to grasp the full scope of what's happening and what the U.S. is doing and the kind of effects that it's going to have on global politics.
I wanna build on what you're saying there and say that it's important to properly, because we're always going to be able to get news. We have like CNN reporters dodging bullets or whatever. And in the modern day and age, you can get news on the ground. What's really important is that as leftists, we frame the issues properly.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the natural framing in the United States is to frame every war like it's World War II. In that, not that it's the scale of World War II, but it's the morality of World War II. That we as the United States have some key of morality that a Democrat, that being the one of the first democratically elected governments and the first constitutional republic, makes us somehow morally superior to the rest of the world.
And this gives us the right to be Team America, World Police, fuck yeah.
Exactly. And that's the framework that, if you have not investigated, what you're thinking, why you how and why you think about United States involvement in wars, if you don't think about that, that is your framing, because that's what's taught in the United States. That is fundamentally the baseline. A lot of folks, and I'd hope that a lot of our listeners will have done a lot of the work to understand that framing, but to understand that the United States goes to war for profit. We are fundamentally war profiteers. We try to do good in those areas, but if we don't, that's not a big deal. Because we were supposed to be there training the Afghan military. but we were really there just propping up the Afghan military.
Yeah.
We were there as the Afghan military. Now, none of this is to say that like that the Taliban is a good organization. You're just swapping out two bad organizations. But the United States didn't have a right to be there.
No. And I think that's the key, is to understand that we don't have any fucking business there. And if Afghanistan is run by the Taliban, that's not our business until it hits our fucking border.
Exactly. And granted, the 9/11 attacks were horrific and a horrific loss of life.
Definitely. And it
Afghanistan
definitely justified a military response, in my opinion, not the overtaking of an entire country and the running of it for 20 plus years.
Well, if the military response was justified, then is protecting the interests of the country and preventing another terrorist attack from happening by keeping the terrorists occupied. You know, because there are terrorists there. Like, there's
Yeah, for sure there are.
like that want to do harm to the United States. Well, and frankly, that's at this point justifiable.
So yeah, like if the U.S. had gone in and done what they said they were going to do, which was rebuild Afghanistan as a government and a military, and slowly but surely put the weight onto their shoulders in order to fight the Taliban until we got to a point where it was 2021 and most of the fighting was being done by the Afghani military, and we were just kind of there supervisory within the green zones, you know, aiding them, providing them with a little support, and we could pull out all of our men, we could pull out our military forces and the people that we promised to pull out and leave the fight to Afghanistan. Sure, that's justifiable. Like, yes, that's fine, cool, good. But we didn't. We just went there and acted as a military force and earned money and made money for the military industry in the U.S. and gained oil, and we're shit.
Yeah, and let's keep in mind that the border between Afghanistan and Kuwait being a U.S. ally at this point, you know, and Afghanistan they weren't until they were occupied by the U.S. and now are back to being not. It's been a zero-sum game, frankly.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of folks before us have said this, but it really truly has been a zero-sum game. Kuwait is still our ally. Afghanistan is run by the Taliban, and it is 2000 all over again.
Mm-hmm.
How does the United States respond to another 9/11 type terror attack?
I don't fucking know.
Do we go back into Afghanistan and overthrow the Taliban?
We will, but I don't want to.
So, do you think that the political will for another war in Afghanistan has been so far depleted that it will take another 9/11 type event, or do you think that?
No, I definitely think it'll be easier this time. It's like anal. The first time you get butt fucked, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of lube and a lot of slow. Put a finger in first. Put a fucking finger in first.
That was.
But the second and third time around, it gets a lot easier. And you just kind of stuff that bad boy in there.
Is this from personal experience?
No, I'm not a huge fan of anal. Done to me or otherwise.
Well, that is yeah. Anyway, that is an accurate, if not lewd, description of what happened. Frankly, I agree with you. The likelihood of us going in to Afghanistan or to intervening in the Middle East again in some way, shape, or form is incredibly high because you can.
Yeah, I mean, you got to pick a new country, right? You gotta pick a new country. We can't go right back to Afghanistan in the next 5 years. I mean, you gotta pick a different spot.
They're not, though. The justification is that the Taliban is going to not be able to rule effectively because it's 2021 and autocracies don't work and theocracies don't work. just straight up. As a somewhat religious person myself, theocracies don't work. Never have, never will. And so they're going to be having to deal with infighting until they abandon that or really loosen up, what they see, unless they lose that fundamentalism. And then what's going to happen is, God forbid, somebody in Afghanistan asks the United States to come back.
That's what'll happen, though. It'll be a request. We'll go back on request.
I mean, yeah, most likely, especially when Ted Cruz is president. Like, I'm beginning to think that's what's gonna happen.
I mean, I don't think Ted Cruz will be president.
They elected Donald Trump, my guy.
Yeah, but Donald Trump spent his entire tenure as the president just calling Ted Cruz a baffling moron. So
yes, but
I don't think the Trumpies will so quickly turn around and be like, Ted Cruz, yeah.
Oh, they totally will.
I don't think they will.
I
think they like Trump too much to be like, you spent 4 years calling this man a moron.
They are going to forget that. They have forgotten that already. I guarantee you. Because Ted Cruz is just an absolute asshole.
Ted Cruz,
go fuck yourself. Anyway, I mean, I think that's the story, man.
It is the story.
There's not a lot of conversation, a lot more conversation to be had around it. This has been talked to death, but it's not a question of if, it's a question of when we go back in. And when we do go back in, someone tag the stock prices real quick and just keep an eye on them and see what they've been doing and what they're about to do. Look at Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, Boeing.
Yeah, if you're a scumbag, go ahead and invest.
I mean, I'd frankly, if you want, here's my investment and advice. If you want to,
this is not financial advice.
Yeah, this is not financial advice.
This is a joke.
If I were to invest in defense, what I would do is I would wait about a year. Let the stocks are going to come down a little bit, and then buy it up in a year and a half, barring some major event in the Middle East. And then when we go back in, you'll be really well positioned to make an absolute killing.
Yeah, truly.
Don't do that. That makes you a war prophet. If you do that, that makes you a war profiteer. And yeah.
In your trash. This is not financial advice.
This has been not financial advice with the Cascadia Workers Project. Aaron, I know you're listening. Yeah, you're an accountant. Don't rat on us, please.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about our last story that actually is proximally related to Ted Cruz in a bit of a roundabout way, because it's the Texas abortion ban.
Oh,
yay!
No.
I was in Texas at a fairly a collection of liberal folks, fairly liberal and progressive folks.
Why was this conference taking place in Texas?
It moves around every year.
Texas, why though? Go to Vermont.
They won the bid. Texas won the bid. Like, it's gonna be in Charlotte next year, and it's gonna be in Memphis the year after.
Oh, so we're shooting for inexpensive places.
I mean, it's not a huge conference. Like,
fair.
Yeah, but either way, yeah, I was in San Antonio when this bill passed, and it was just a whole thing, especially when you're with a bunch of policy nerds, and so it was just like, okay, what the fuck just happened? So let's explain what the fuck just happened. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled on the Texas abortion ban case, revealing some measures regarding enforcement, leaving the population horrified. The Supreme Court did not rule on the constitutionality of any portion of this law, be it enforcement or anything else. What it did do, however, is take issue with the process the law wound up before the Supreme Court. So the plaintiff, Whole Woman's Health, was seeking injunctive relief, meaning they wanted a law to be placed on hold while the lawsuit was ongoing. The Supreme Court declined their request on the grounds that they did not sufficiently demonstrate their procedural burden, which is lawyer jargon for they didn't follow the proper process and show the correct documentation at the correct times. We've talked a bit about the substance of the bill before. We've talked about the Texas abortion ban when we thought it was just not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. We were wrong. But to recap, the bill would ban abortions after 6 weeks, specifically after the detection of a fetal heartbeat. The term fetal heartbeat is a misnomer. The flickering present on the ultrasound is a electrical current, but does not indicative of any heartbeat. A heartbeat is created by the valves in your heart opening and closing. Yeah. There are no heart or valves at that point.
There's more electricity if you touch an electric fence.
That's actually true. The heartbeat sound...
Oh, I know. I've touched a couple electric fences in my day.
The heartbeat sound that is associated with the moment of the mom hearing the heartbeat for the first time is in fact manufactured by the ultrasound machine.
That's so wild, dude.
I did not know that until I did research for this story.
That's so nuts. That's so gross, dude.
So let's be very clear about this. The heartbeat sound...
Fake sound. It's like the Scion FRS and how it has a sound box. Oh my god.
Yeah, so that is not coming from anything other than an algorithm recognizing the electric signal and matching up the electric signal to the sound.
Make the heartbeat sound. Make the heartbeat sound.
Yeah, so it is literally not a heartbeat. In fact, the term fetal heartbeat is not used in medicine. That is a non-medical term. That is a term designed so that stupid people like us can understand what the fuck the doctor's talking about, saying that there is essentially a little bit more going on.
This is the absolute bare minimum first sign of life that's growing inside of you.
It is not even that. It is just a milestone of the pregnancy advancing. Does not mean that it is alive. We've the law's enforcement mechanism has been widely discussed and criticized. The rhetoric around a bounty system, I thought was this has got to be really inflammatory rhetoric. Granted, passions are high. It's we're talking about abortion again. Passions are going to be really high. I understand that, you might use a little bit more inflammatory rhetoric. A bounty system feels only minorly inflammatory when you dig into how this is structured.
Yeah. Literally big payouts.
$10,000 payouts. The state delegates the authority to prosecute to private citizens in the means of filing lawsuits against anybody aiding and abetting an abortion. Citizens anywhere in the United States can sue on behalf of the state of Texas. Anyone aiding or abetting an abortion after 6 weeks. This not only exposes doctors and staff to private lawsuits, it also exposes private individuals that could be on the hook. Let's say the gal going to get an abortion calls an Uber. That Uber driver can be on the hook.
Oh yeah.
Literally anybody that gives any help to this lady. Cook her breakfast, you're on the hook. This is a wild law.
It's super gross.
This is straight up a Wild West bounty hunting law where the state, where the government abdicates its authority to enforce laws to the population.
Wanted, dead or alive, harlots.
Yeah, that's functional. No, harlots and all that support them. It's not...
Wanted, dead or alive, harlots and all the miscreants that choose to do business with them at all.
Yeah, essentially, yes. Capitalism's all about choice. Anyway, so what happens now? So states across the country are looking to emulate Texas's law. Conservative states, obviously. Most clinics in Texas have stopped performing abortions after 6 weeks in fear of getting sued, which means that the law is doing exactly what it was supposed to do. According to the New York Times, call centers are flooded with confused and terrified women trying to understand the implications of the new law. One woman One anecdote describes a woman under 6 weeks who is eligible to get an abortion but is positive for COVID, so she would have to quarantine until after the 6 week mark, making her ineligible for the abortion. Legal scholars across the country weighed in, and the consensus seems to be that the law works at functionally stopping abortions. But whether or not the Supreme Court will actually rule the law as unconstitutional is still undetermined. But if it is ruled constitutional, this will truly be the end of Roe v. Wade. So, Dain, I mean, I really don't know where to go with this, frankly, because this law is just like, you know what it feels like? It feels like we're regressing back to the 90s. Like, we have racial injustice out not never before seen. It's always been there, always been seen.
Pull back on the range on that one.
But like we are backsliding on racial justice issues.
Yeah.
We are backsliding on the advancements that have been made within women's rights and healthcare rights. We are backsliding in so much in this country. Like, how do we even begin to, like, let's just focus on this. How do we begin to fight this?
I thought I read something, or I saw a video that broke, I think yesterday or the day before, that the U.S. government is doing something about this. There is a lawsuit against the state of Texas.
Yeah, I believe the Justice Department is filing suit.
Yeah.
So that'll be what probably goes before the Supreme Court. The real question then becomes, on a 5-4 split court that is very conservative, are you going to actually end up with a favorable result? Because we did not expect this bill to make it this far.
Yeah, definitely not.
And yet here we are 6 months later, still talking about it, and it's looking more and more like, I mean, this is the reality in Texas right now. Like, this bill is in effect.
Yeah.
If this bill is deemed constitutional, that will expand beyond Texas to many, many, many other states.
Yeah. I mean, if you need an abortion, get the fuck out of Texas and move.
Yeah, and like haul ass. But here's the thing, that goes back to classism. Just like not everybody can just get up and leave the United States, you can't just get up and leave Texas.
Oh, absolutely. Getting up and leaving is a lot more difficult than it sounds.
And ultimately, the people, frankly, the stats show that folks that are getting abortions tend to be lower income folks.
Yeah, because you get an abortion because you can't provide a decent life for the child, as among many other reasons.
I mean, yeah, and so that becomes a huge barrier there, especially when you live deep in Texas and the only state, like, I forget which city this was, but it's like the closest out of state clinic is 600 miles away from them. Like, I'd fly that. Like,
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not driving 600. Fuck
right.
yourself.
Like,
no. So like some things that I've heard are one specific story that I've heard is there's a women's rights group that provides abortion medication to women in need free of charge that is still shipping to Texas. And it's in unmarked packaging, so you can just, if you're a woman in Texas and you need an abortion, you can get a hold of this rights group, and I'll put their shit up right here. But they will ship you the abortion pill. Still, to this day in Texas.
So is this like Plan B? Is this...
No, this is the abortion pill. So there is a pill that provides an abortion.
I thought it was like a actual procedure.
It is. The longer you let it go,
okay,
the more it needs to be an actual procedure. But when it's just an accumulation of cells, you can kind of just take this pill and poop it out. Granted, that's a real... that's me really minimizing the situation. But I recently had a friend who went to Mexico, who went on a trip to Mexico with his girlfriend, and they got the pill and took it and went off without a hitch. Abortion success. Great success.
Hey, they got off without a hitch, and then got off without a hitch.
Yeah. The nice part about it was they knew they were getting the abortion, so she could drink the entire time she was in Mexico. It didn't matter.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, there are organizations that are doing things like that, and I think if the longer we let this happen, the more you'll see private organizations doing everything they can to assist women in getting the abortion that they need. But ultimately, we're here to discuss how it can be stopped.
Mm-hmm. Well,
how we can provide uterine freedom to all women.
How do you think that how do you think this is going to impact working women in Texas?
I mean, there's already no fucking maternity leave. What do you mean? It's gonna cripple them.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where I was getting at. Is
yeah, you're forced to have a baby. If you don't want to go through the entire process of getting a back alley abortion by the few people who are willing to give it to you under fucked up conditions now, which is what it's going to boil down to. People will still get abortions, but it will be considerably less safe and far more dangerous for the women involved. Fuck the bounty system. I genuinely think after a couple of years, if this sticks, after a couple of years, people will stop fucking. Like, there will be obviously some people that still report abortions, but like, it's pretty easy to not tell anybody you're pregnant and just go get a fucking abortion. Like, but like the process, like big organizations, safe places to get abortions will no longer operate. So it will literally be like Ripper Docs from Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah.
And you have to go down into an alleyway and get sliced open and get that mess cut out you.
Honestly, yeah. I was gonna say some of the Ripper Docs in there are pretty cool, but then again, some of the
Corpo Ripper Docs, whack.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, really bad situation, and like,
it's just super dangerous because, like we said, it's not going to stop abortions.
No, it's going to,
it's just going to put a lot of people's lives in danger.
It's going to, yeah, and it, not to mention that, you know, if it's your thing, it puts a lot of you know, it puts a lot of workers in jeopardy of losing their jobs. It's going to close down these different centers.
Yeah, and ultimately it will also force a lot of women who would have had an abortion to just keep children that they don't want. So it's going to put more people into poverty. It's going to
pull people out of the labor force.
Yeah, it's going to completely annihilate a woman's right to just pursue her career if she falls into a situation of accidental pregnancy.
Like, this is bad even from a capitalist standpoint.
Yeah, it's fucked up. It's horrible for everybody.
Like, because you lose huge amounts of your labor force. And, like, you can't exploit labor that is not there. I mean, you can. We're not going to get into that. We're not going to get into, like, classism and the exploitation there. But, like, and this impacts the most vulnerable people in our population. Now, if you are truly gung-ho about, like, every like, as soon as that sperm penetrates that wall, it is a human life, then you need to be funding the services that allow women to and we should that allow women to be able to help support their children. We should be funding those more as is, but you can't just focus. If your issue is abortion, and you can't just focus on that without recognizing what the repercussions are of that, because you're not going to stop people from having sex. You're not going to stop horny people from smashing without protection.
It's the equivalent of a surgeon who just cuts somebody open and pulls out their appendix, and then it's just like, that's it.
That's it. The issue's been solved.
Yeah. No, that person's going to die because he's cut open with no appendix.
Exactly. So, like, not to mention that you're bringing children into lives of poverty that they could very well die during childhood.
Easily.
And like, that is also, if abortion you find is your responsibility, then that is also your responsibility.
Absolutely.
And you, by banning abortions, are making that worse. This entire push against abortions, which I am, again, totally against, should be predicated by this being solved first before you ban abortions. So the folks that are pushing for this are literally just not just bad at policy making, but bad at prioritizing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm really genuinely worried, and I've not been worried about the overturning of Roe v. Wade for a long time.
That's because we didn't think we would have to be. It's an insane notion. We solved the problem during Roe v. Wade. We said, yeah, women, you're right. Women should have bodily autonomy and be able to decide whether or not they want to have a child, despite whether or not they got pregnant.
Yep.
And we were like, yeah, you know what? If anything's in the fucking books, that's in the fucking books.
And the problem is that Roe v. Wade makes it so that, like, guarantees privacy from the government between the woman and her doctor. It doesn't actually guarantee abortions.
No, yeah.
And so we what we really need is for this to break in our favor at the Supreme Court.
Well, what really sucks here is that we've allowed it to get to this point. Because what should have happened is after Roe v. Wade, it should have been written into law that women have that bodily autonomy and women are allowed. But instead, we considered it just a moot point, right? Well, we're like, abortions, they're fine. Some people don't like them, they don't have to get them, but people who want them can get them. And it's fine for it to just be a legal precedent that was made during Roe v. Wade, and we'll just refer back to that. But that doesn't stop laws from being made to prevent abortions.
Yeah.
It allows us to pursue legal action against laws that are created, but it should have been solidified in United States law soon after Roe v. Wade took place.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the reality of what's going to happen is going to look something like this. The state is going to bring suit against the state, or is it the State Department? I think whichever one. Justice Department is going to bring suit against the law in Texas. It's going to go up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's going to strike the enforcement mechanisms through and force the state to actually go after people, and is going to find the actual abortion ban constitutional. That is my genuine fear and my genuine belief as to what's going to happen.
Then we're just going to have to halo drop abortion doctors into Texas, and just like and then they're gonna drop in, perform the abortion safely and securely within the home of the woman, and then they're gonna have to use the thing that Batman used to get out of that building in Japan, where he pulls the chute and it shoots the sky hook up and he gets yanked out by a CIA plane.
That would be so cool. I would be a doctor for that.
Definitely.
I'd go get a medical degree just to do that.
I'm here to get my medical degree. Yeah, cool, man. What kind of doctor do you want to be? Just abortions. Just covert abortions.
Just spec ops. Yeah. Spec op abortion. It's run by a team of leftist Navy SEALs. Oh, do those exist? I don't think those exist.
Everyone's allowed to have a beard, but you also have to have a man bun.
Exactly. It's
a requirement. It's a uniform requirement.
So there's a little hole in the back of the carved out in the back of the helmet.
Every Green Beret has a strap to hold up your man bun.
That'd low-key be kind of tight.
It'd be so sick.
So keep that shit perky. Keep that looking nice. But my heart goes out for the uterus-bearing folks in Texas. I am shocked. I am embarrassed. And frankly, we all have to do better. As a country, we have to do better, because the fact that it's 2021 and that this is still apparently up for debate, that, you know, a lot of the issues that we talk about are up for debate, is really, frankly, it's horrifying.
Yeah. It's fucked up. Yeah, a lot of the things we talk about are fucked up, but this is on the more fucked up end of fucked up.
Yeah.
How fucked up is fucked up?
That's fucked up. So, ultimately, any last words on this from you, Dain?
We should get a coalition of pilots together who will fly into private airports.
You're really down for the spec ops, like
pick up women who need abortions, fly them gratis to a state where abortions are legal, get the abortion, fly them back,
and just eat the lawsuits.
Yeah, I mean, we'll create like a fund.
Yeah, I mean, that's not.
I mean, if we can't beat it, like if the Supreme Court's not going to do anything about it, we just have to like kind of goal line stand ram abortions down the state's throat. Just be like, hey, we're not going to stop letting women get safe abortions. So the problem with that is that when it scales up, because it will scale up, if it's deemed constitutional, it's not going to be Texas. It's going to be literally everywhere. Texas, Florida, Louisiana, maybe Arizona, depending on how purple Arizona becomes over the next few years. I genuinely, I'm definitely the optimist here, because I don't think it'll get through the Supreme Court.
I hope that it does not get through the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I don't think it will. Based on the way people like Amy Coney Barrett have been ruling, and like, I have seen the Republican-based justices do the right thing in some rulings.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but you have to
and stay loyal to the legality of the situation and the precedent that's been set so far, as opposed to just ruling in favor of their party.
I get that to a certain degree.
But like I said, I'm the optimist.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you. I think there is room for hope here. I just don't. I'm not confident enough in. I'm not confident. I mean, we know Kavanaugh will vote the way that Kavanaugh will vote. Mm-hmm. We know. I mean, yeah, it's gonna be touch and go. It's gonna be a 5-4 decision, mm-hmm. and it's going to be gnarly. It really depends on what kind of mental gymnastics they can do. If they can repeal it, I think, and can do the mental gymnastics to do it, they will, frankly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it comes down to, as to whether or not there is availability for that. And I can't confidently say that it isn't constitutional for the government to do this. Well,
that's the issue, though, is like, that's where we have eternally fucked up, is we have not made it constitutional, unconstitutional to not allow a woman to get an abortion. Mm-hmm. Is like, and we've had years to do this, and our fuck up as a society and as a nation has been letting it sit this long as just a legal precedent.
Yep. Well, we're at 2 hours and 40 minutes, Dain. Yeah. So this is going to be a real long episode. I might end up dropping a story, or we might just release a couple of, one or two of the stories as just videos.
But the whole damn thing is going to be on YouTube.
So check us out on YouTube. Today we'll be launching our Patreon site, mm-hmm. and then you'll be able to still find us on all our normal places. Facebook, you can find the audio version of the podcast on both Spotify and Audible. Now that Apple's App Store is getting broken up a little bit, maybe we can get a foot in the door there. Possibly. I doubt it. It doesn't change the fact that we'd still have to hire another graphic designer to remake a bunch of shit. Either way, thank you for being here today, Dain. Thank you to our loyal listeners for tuning in, and thank you for being patient with us over our brief little break. It is great to be back in the studio with you, man.
Absolutely.
So thank you for getting everything set up today and getting a green screen going so we can get all our nice graphics up. And with that, let's wrap episode 19 of the Cascadia Workers Project. Oh, I almost forgot Danny again. Fuck, man. Fuck.
Danny B.
And special thank you to Danny Bernstein, who composed our theme music, or at least the music part of our theme music, and Ted Cruz. Go fuck yourself.